So, with the rise of breach notification requirements, as we talked about in many industries and government institutions or regulators, how do you think this is going to affect directly the requirements that carriers are imposing on cyber insurance policies? And has that already happened?
Yeah, I think it's simple. If you're gonna be forced to pay damages, then the carriers are gonna force you to put controls in place to prevent them from having to pay those damages, right? So I think it's funny. I think this could be perceived as, wow, everyone's getting so strict. Like, there's a reason. It's ultimately there to protect you. So I think we're seeing this across the board. I really like seeing carriers starting to trend toward the direction of just forcing people's hand on framework that's already proven. I think that's the best and most safe approach that does not add more complexity in terms of product selection and what do I need. So I really like the shift we're seeing with folks on saying, hey, like Steven, to your earlier point, like CIS is a great established framework. They don't have a lot of self-interest in terms of getting rich off of what they're offering people. They're authentically coming up with controls to protect you, and seeing carriers start to incorporate those into underwriting, so that when you do go to get cyber, you feel like you've already put a lot of plans in the motion for what they're asking you to do, right? So I think that's a really good trend in our industry right now. Is that it's I'm not seeing a lot of carriers come up with like one-off requirements that are unique to them. It seems to be relatively like generalized, and people are trying to move in the same direction.
Yeah, I agree, and I've seen some similar things. But I'm curious, Matt, in terms of what you see, especially since you guys are so close to that kind of application and the process of getting folks coverage through many different carriers. What are your thoughts on this question?
I think it's definitely, as you look at it, especially in the insurance world, you see, all of these requirements and compliance issues, and they typically come out kind of on a state by state basis. It might start in California or in New York, and then slowly but surely it kind of proliferates across the entire country. And we've seen that, I think, with just about anything in the cyber world, that identity theft world. I mean, there are standards and protocols that are absolutely required after a breach or an incident. And I think it's pretty simple to kind of look at the front side of that and say, not only what's the likelihood of one of these things happening, or us needing to go through this process or follow these protocols. But I think it also goes down to just the, particularly almost at the state level as well. They want to be good advocates, right? They want to put the persona out that they're doing the right things, and they're asking their carriers to put the right, controls and ask the right questions and have the right requirements. So I think that's one of the big things that we see is just kind of that, that trickle down. If a state comes up with a great idea, well, the neighboring state's going to take a look at it, and it might eventually get adopted by all of the states. But I think there's kind of that continual, unfortunately, kind of reactionary, right? It's not necessarily always proactive. A lot of this is looking at, what happened, and what did we have to do because of that, and then trying to put something in place. And I think that's what's exciting about what we have here is really a group of kind of like-minded individuals that are saying, well, let's do something proactive, and let's try to prevent or eliminate as much as we can, to make these things a little bit easier, and perhaps make these requirements less of a requirement, more of just an industry standard, right? It's not necessarily it's more strict. It's just, again, to some of the earlier analogies, it's you're not going to get that homeowner's insurance if you don't have smoke detectors in your house, right? I mean, it's really as simple as that. And I think you're just going to probably see more of that, where this is less of a response or reaction, short of obviously the newfangled breach that we don't even know about yet, right? That'll still be reactionary, but I think everything else will become more of just a norm or a standard. And I think the landscape of the state regulators and the way policy tends to go from state to state to state is just going to be natural as we go forward.
Yeah, it makes total sense. Well, and Kirsten, kind of dovetailing off of that, I know you and I have talked a lot, and you've done a lot of personal research on this topic in particular, especially as it relates to other forms of insurance. And we've talked in other content about like auto insurance and how that industry changed over time, and given that, I'm really curious to hear your thoughts and input on this question.
Yes, I mean it's interesting the requirements that I'm seeing from certain carriers, such as patch cycles and a degradation of coverage. So if you haven't patched within 45 days, you lose 25% of your coverage, so on and so on and so on until it flips over and you have significant co-insurance where you're paying in long before you get any coverage, and then you basically have no coverage. And I think those are really good things because we know that those things matter. They have high impact on the vulnerabilities that can make a difference in a cyber incident. And so I think things like that are broad, as we've been discussing in this portion of the conversation, I think are helpful because we know generally that they work, kind of like we know generally that, exercising works. And so we want to make that part of our diet and exercise plan for cyber readiness. And the other thing is just really trying to understand it. And I think we suffer from this particularly in our cyber land, which is it doesn't always have to be zero. And I feel like we're judged a lot on zero. And, like Ryan, right? No zero house fires, no zero car crashes. Mm-hmm. But what we haven't been able to prove is how do we reduce the severity and impact and frequency of these events? And so one of the things that I think is a challenge that we suffer from, and I hear this conversation a lot as well, we have all the claims data, so we know what we need to be doing. And it's like, but do we? Because what we know was what we've seen. And this is our challenge that's unique to our space in comparison to all these other insurance risks that exist, because what we don't know, like if there's a particular malware strain that someone used as an injection to have a ransom attack, were there 20 million organizations that had that injection, but only 10% of them had losses? And maybe they were full aggregate losses to the policy, and so they were very high severity. But was it really high severity? And I think that these are the things in having these combined programs that can really help these discussions, because the in relationship to what question is what we don't have. And to your point of our prior conversations, what we've been able to have is a body of data. We know how many car accidents happened. We know how many people had seatbelts on, and we know the results of those who didn't, right? These are the things that we really need to get to in cyber that I think will have a significant impact in being able to boundary what the requirements are and how we help people make better risk decisions, better purchasing decisions, and also the need for services. And I think as we continue on, the need for outsourced SOC services or monitoring for configuration changes, these are the things I think are like the last mile components that will help us get much more efficient at combating these things that are the unknowns, because we know they're coming, but it's being able to rapidly identify and remediate those incidents such that they are really indicators of compromise and incidents, not full-blown breaches.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And Ryan, you and I have talked about this recently. I think the interesting trend here that we've seen in response to a lot of that is that it's forcing service providers to take a more holistic, all-inclusive approach to providing those types of services, because frankly, anything short of that is just not adequate anymore. It's not enough to be a point solution manager. You've got to manage an entire security program, and it has to be end to end. Otherwise, it's not going to actually address the risk, Kirsten, to multiple points that you made and what you shared. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Steven, and I think if we're being honest and we have the data, you may find that working with the service provider poses more risk than not working with the service provider. Like, these are things we don't know, right? So I think the service provider world has been turned upside down. I think it's been very good for many who are starting to take this very seriously and understand the risk they pose to their customers and the risk their customers pose back to them. So I think it starts at the service provider level, like making sure I may be an MSP that services 100 small organizations. I may only have 25 employees, but I should not look at myself as a 25 employee SMB from a cybersecurity strategy, because the collective of what I serve is that of a mid-enterprise. Therefore, I should take steps to put in a mid-enterprise stack, right? And I think that's where, Kirsten, to your point, as we get more data, we will know based on industry, based on size of organization, okay, because of these components, here's a subset of things that you need to do based on that data. But I think, the service provider world's super interesting. And I come from that area, but, you kind of grow up in the industry telling companies, yeah, we're everything you need. we're your help desk, we're your cybersecurity. And now you're like, whoa, I don't want, I'm not everything you need. There's much more you need to do. And then they're getting a lot of resistance from companies that are a little smaller with less money going, I can't afford to put these things in place. And therein lies a lot of tension that exists right now.